The cold had teeth that morning. It bit through Jake Miller's jacket, found the spaces between his ribs, settled in his bones like it planned to stay. He stood at the edge of the Mendenhall Glacier melt zone, 63 years old, and feeling every one of those years in his knees, watching the ice give up its secrets the way dying men give up confessions. Slow, inevitable, true. He'd been a paleogeneticist for 40 years. Spent half his life pulling DNA from things that should have stayed buried. Ancient wolves, extinct birds, bones that crumbled when you looked at them wrong. He thought he'd seen everything the past could throw at him. He was wrong. What they found in that ice changed everything. Not just what we knew about evolution or migration patterns or any of that academic stuff. It changed what it meant to be human, what it meant to be alone in the world, what it meant to keep secrets that could save a species, or damn it. My name's Jake Miller. I'm 63 years old, got arthritis in both hands, and a heart that skips beats when it feels like it. I'm also the man who discovered Bigfoot was real, proved it with DNA evidence that couldn't be disputed, and then watched the government bury it so deep that even the truth couldn't dig it out. This is that story. And before you think I'm some conspiracy nut job, some old man losing his grip on reality, let me tell you something. I've got the coordinates, I've got the data, I've got testimony from people who were there, who saw what I saw, who know what we found, and I've got nothing left to lose. Now, before we get into what happened up there on that glacier, what we pulled out of ice that had been frozen since before the pyramids were built, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. This channel's all about real stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew. And trust me, after you hear what happened next, you're gonna wanna stick around for more. All right, let's talk about September 3rd, 1996. The day the phone rang and changed my life. I was in my lab in Seattle, up to my elbows in samples from the Kennewick Man discovery, when Karen Martinez called. She was a glaciologist up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, had a voice like gravel and a mind sharp enough to cut glass. We'd worked together before, published a few papers, had that easy professional friendship built on mutual respect and shared curiosity about the world's old bones. But when she spoke that morning, her voice shook. Karen didn't shake. Not for anything. "Jake," she said, "you need to get up here." Now, I pulled off my gloves, cradled the phone between shoulder and ear. "Karen, I'm kind of in the middle of something here. Can this wait?" "No." Flat. Certain. "We found something in the glacier. Something that shouldn't exist." The way she said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I'd known her 8 years. Never heard that tone before. "What kind of something?" Silence on the line. Long enough that I thought we'd lost connection. Then, quiet. Like she was afraid someone might overhear. "A body, Jake. Non-human. Perfectly preserved. And it's like nothing in the fossil record." I was on a plane 12 hours later. The flight north gave me time to think. Time to run through possibilities in my head, each one more unlikely than the last. A bear, maybe. Some unknown species caught in the ice during the last glacial period. But Karen knew bears. She knew megafauna. She wouldn't have called me for something ordinary. The plane descended through clouds that looked like dirty cotton, and Juneau appeared below. A scatter of buildings pressed between mountains and sea, clinging to the edge of the continent like it wasn't quite sure it belonged there. The cold hit me the second I stepped onto the tarmac. Not the wet cold of Seattle. This cold was different. Ancient, the kind that reminded you that ice ages were real, that the world had been frozen before and would be frozen again, that human civilization was just a warm spell between catastrophes. Karen met me at the airport in a university truck that'd seen better days. She looked like she hadn't slept since she'd called, eyes red-rimmed, but blazing with something between excitement and fear. She was 58 then, hair gone mostly gray, hands weathered from years of field work. We'd both gotten old in this business. The difference was, she'd aged graceful. I'd aged like cheap furniture, warped and creaky and held together by stubbornness. "How's the preservation?" I asked as we drove toward the glacier. She glanced at me, then back at the road. "Jake, it's perfect. I mean, we're talking soft tissue, hair, the eyes are still intact. Whatever froze it fast. Flash freeze? Maybe. We're estimating 8 to 10,000 years. Maybe more. And you're certain it's not human? Wait till you see it." We drove for an hour, leaving Juneau behind, heading into wilderness that'd been there long before the town and would be there long after. The Mendenhall Glacier rose ahead of us, a river of ice carving through mountains the way time carves through lives, slow and relentless and unstoppable. But it was retreating now. Had been for decades. Climate change pulling back the ice curtain, revealing things that had been hidden since the world was younger. The dig site was cordoned off with orange tape, guarded by university security who looked bored and cold in equal measure. Smart of Karen to keep it quiet. News like this leaked, and you'd have every cryptozoologist, every nut job with a theory, every media vulture descending like it was Roswell all over again. She led me to a refrigerated tent near the excavation point. Inside, lying on an examination table under a thermal sheet, was the find. Karen pulled back the sheet. I forgot how to breathe. It was humanoid. Definitely humanoid. But human? No. God? No. About 8 feet tall, though hard to measure accurately with it curled up the way it was, the way things curl when they're trying to keep warm, trying to hold on to life even as it leaks away, covered in thick, dark, reddish-brown hair matted with ice crystals that caught the light like diamonds. The face was the worst part. Heavy brow ridge, broad, flat nose, protruding jaw, but the features underneath all that were close enough to human that looking at it felt like looking into a mirror from another world, another branch of the evolutionary tree that we'd thought had died out millennia ago. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Karen stood beside me, and in the reflected light from the ice crystals still clinging to the body, her face looked carved from stone. We found it 3 days ago. Hiker thought it was a bear carcass, exposed by the melt. When we investigated, we knew immediately what we had. Or what we thought we had. I moved closer. 40 years of training overriding the shock, the disbelief, the sheer impossible reality of what I was seeing. The preservation was remarkable. Individual hairs visible, skin texture beneath the hair, leathery but intact. Old scars on the left shoulder and arm, healed over, telling stories of a life lived hard in a world that didn't give anything easy. The hands were what got me. Large, yes, powerful. But the fingers were long, almost delicate. The nails were thick but trimmed, worn down by use. These were hands that had gripped things. Made things? Maybe. Used tools. The hands of something intelligent. Have you taken samples? Preliminary tissue for radiocarbon dating and DNA extraction, but we waited for you before going further. I looked at her. Karen, if this is what I think it is, a Bigfoot. She said the word like it hurt. A genuine, verified, scientifically documented Bigfoot. The words hung in the cold air of the tent. Bigfoot. Sasquatch. The legend every kid heard around campfires, every hunter swore they'd glimpsed in the woods, every skeptic dismissed as mass delusion and hoaxes. Except this wasn't a legend. This was 8 feet of dead hominid, preserved in ice for 10,000 years, lying on a table in front of me with skin and hair and eyes that had once seen a world we could barely imagine. The implications, I said, and my voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. If we can extract viable DNA, if we can prove what this is, where it came from, how it relates to humans and other hominids, I know. I spent the next 2 hours conducting a preliminary examination. Photographs from every angle, measurements, additional tissue samples from different parts of the body, carefully extracted, properly stored. The body showed trauma, broken ribs, healed badly, a fractured left arm that had mended crooked. Whatever had killed this individual, it hadn't been peaceful. It had fought something, lost. Died cold and alone on a glacier 10,000 years ago. We need to move this to a proper facility, I said finally. The University of Washington has the equipment for detailed analysis, and we need to keep this absolutely confidential until we have hard data. Karen nodded. Agreed. But Jake, we've got maybe a week before someone talks. Word's already spreading through the university. People know we found something significant. We spent the next 2 days coordinating transport. The body was carefully packaged in a refrigerated container, every protocol followed, every measurement documented. On September 6th, we flew it down to Seattle under the cover story that it was an archaeological find from a Native American burial site, something that would explain the security and confidentiality while keeping questions at bay. By September 8th, the body was in a secure facility at the University of Washington, and I'd assembled a small team. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, biological anthropologist, 56 years old, sharp as a razor and twice as cutting when she wanted to be. Dr. Hassan Ahmed, geneticist, 61, specialized in ancient DNA, had hands that never shook even when extracting nanogram quantities of degraded genetic material. And Dr. Patricia Lynn, expert in radiocarbon dating, 63, who'd forgotten more about archaeological preservation than most people ever learned. We kept the team small. The fewer who knew, the better chance we had of controlling the narrative, of doing proper science before the circus began. The radiocarbon dating results came back first. Patricia worked around the clock for 3 days, running multiple tests, verifying, double-checking, because results like these couldn't be wrong. Couldn't afford to be wrong. She presented her findings on September 11th. The collagen samples show a date of approximately 9,400 years before present, give or take 200 years. That puts this individual in the early Holocene, shortly after the last ice age ended. So it was alive during the same period as the Clovis people, Jennifer said, the earliest confirmed human inhabitants of North America, not just contemporaneous, I added, potentially interacting with them. We know humans were in Alaska by at least 14,000 years ago. This creature would have been living alongside them, but it was the DNA results that would prove revolutionary and terrifying in their implications. Hassan spent 2 weeks extracting and sequencing DNA from the tissue samples. Ancient DNA work is brutal. The genetic material degrades over time, fragments, becomes contaminated with bacterial DNA, environmental DNA, the genetic noise of thousands of years, but the preservation of this body was so good, the freezing so fast and complete, that Hassan was able to extract remarkably intact sequences. On September 25th, he called an emergency meeting. His face was ashen when we gathered, his hands shook slightly as he distributed printouts of his findings. Hassan's hands never shook. "I've run these tests multiple times," he said. "Had them verified by an independent lab that thinks they're analyzing archaeological human samples. The results are consistent." He pulled up data on the projection screen, numbers and sequences that looked like alphabet soup to anyone outside genetics, but to us meant everything. The mitochondrial DNA shows this creature diverged from the human lineage approximately 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. That's after Homo erectus, but before Neanderthals fully emerged as a distinct species. Jennifer leaned forward. "So it's in the Homo genus? It's a human relative?" "More than that." Hassan pulled up another slide. "Nuclear DNA analysis shows something extraordinary. There's evidence of genetic admixture with anatomically modern humans, recent admixture, within the last 50,000 years." The room went silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses on your chest and makes breathing hard. "Admixture," I said slowly. "You mean, these creatures interbred with humans, just like Neanderthals did, just like Denisovans did, and the DNA signature is present in modern human populations." He pulled up more data. I analyzed it against genomic databases. Approximately 2 to 3% of the genome in certain Native American populations shows markers consistent with this species. "Christ." Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "We're talking about a completely unknown human relative, one that survived until recently, that bred with our ancestors, that left its genetic fingerprint in living people. And if that's true," Jennifer said, "if this species interbred with humans 10,000 years ago or more recently, then where are they now? Where are the living populations?" That was the question. The question that would define the next 3 decades of my life. The question that would lead to secrets buried so deep that even the truth couldn't dig them out. We spent the next week analyzing the morphology, the physical characteristics of the body. 8 feet tall, estimated weight around 600 pounds when alive. Skeletal structure suggested bipedal locomotion, but with adaptations for moving through dense forest, long arms, powerful shoulders. Foot structure, unlike anything in the human fossil record, adapted for gripping uneven terrain, for climbing, for moving silently through underbrush. The skull was fascinating and disturbing. Brain case volume approximately 1,200 cubic centimeters, not as large as modern humans, but within the range of archaic Homo species. Teeth showed wear patterns consistent with an omnivorous diet, heavy on plant material, but with evidence of meat consumption. No tool wear on the teeth, but the hands suggested tool use capability. Jennifer conducted a thorough examination of the soft tissue. Muscle attachment points suggest incredible strength, probably 3 to 4 times human strength pound for pound. The hair is an adaptation for cold climate survival, thick, water resistant. The eyes show adaptations for low light vision. This was a creature built for surviving in harsh environments. A cold adapted hominid, I said, surviving in the northern forest and mountains, possibly crossing the Bering Land Bridge during the last glacial period, following the same migration routes as early humans. But why didn't we find them before? Patricia asked. Why no fossil record? Why no archaeological evidence? Small population, Hassan suggested, highly mobile, living in areas where preservation is poor, and possibly avoiding humans deliberately. If they're intelligent enough to use tools, they're intelligent enough to hide. We prepared our findings, wrote them up, drafted a paper that would revolutionize anthropology, genetics, our understanding of human evolution, and the peopling of the Americas. We plan to publish in Nature with all our data made freely available, with the coordinates of the find site included so others could verify. We were going to tell the world that we weren't alone, that we'd never been alone. That hiding in the forests and mountains was another intelligent species, one we dismissed as myth, one that shared our history, our genetics, our planet. We were naive. On October 7th, 1996, 2 men in dark suits showed up at my office. They had federal credentials. Department of the Interior, they said, Special Projects Division. They wanted to see the specimen. They wanted to see our data. They had authorization signed by officials whose names I didn't recognize but whose titles carried weight. I should have refused. Should have called a lawyer. Should have told them to get a warrant. But they were polite, professional, and I was still operating under the assumption that science mattered, that evidence mattered, that truth would win out in the end. I was 63 years old enough to know better, young enough to still believe. They examined the specimen for an hour, took samples, photographed everything. Then they sat me down in my own office and explained how things were going to work. The creature I'd found didn't exist. The DNA results were contaminated samples, likely modern human DNA mixed with bear. The paper we'd written would not be published. The specimen would be transported to a federal facility for proper analysis, after which it would be returned. It would not be returned. And if I spoke about any of this publicly, if I shared our data, if I tried to publish our findings, I would face charges of mishandling archaeological materials, violation of federal antiquities law, and possible espionage charges for disclosing classified information. Classified? I stared at them. How the hell is a Bigfoot body classified? The older of the two agents, a man named Marcus Thompson with gray hair and eyes like flint, leaned forward. Dr. Miller, what you found is a matter of national security. The existence of this species, if confirmed publicly, would have implications for land management, federal resources, conservation law, Native American tribal rights, and international treaty obligations. The disruption would be catastrophic. Catastrophic? My voice rose despite myself. We're talking about a living species of hominid, a human relative surviving into modern times. The scientific importance is acknowledged, which is why you're being offered a position with the federal research program that has been studying this species for the past 40 years. The words hit me like cold water. 40 years? I said slowly. You've known about him for 40 years? Thompson nodded. We've been aware of scattered reports since the 1950s, confirmed their existence through tissue samples and photographic evidence in the early 1980s. Your frozen specimen is the best preserved example we've found, but it's not the first. And Dr. Miller, they're not extinct. There's a living population, small, endangered, highly intelligent, and they don't want to be found. The world tilted sideways. I gripped my desk to steady myself. How many? I asked. Current estimates put the North American population at around 600 individuals, down from approximately 2,000 in 1950. Jesus Christ, they're going extinct, and nobody knows. And if people knew, the younger agent said, if this went public, what do you think would happen? Every hunter, every scientist, every curiosity seeker would flood into their habitat. The species would be harassed, studied, documented into extinction within a decade. Right now, they survive because they're hidden, because they're protected by secrecy. Thompson pulled out a folder, slid it across my desk. This is an offer of employment, federal salary, access to all existing research, the opportunity to actually study living members of this species, to contribute to their conservation. Or you can refuse, and we'll confiscate your specimen, classify all your data, and you'll spend the rest of your career wondering what could have been. I looked at the folder, at the agents, at the specimen visible through my office window, lying in its refrigerated containment. I thought about publishing, about fighting, about calling a press conference and showing the world what we'd found. But I also thought about 600 individuals trying to survive in a world that would swarm them the second their existence became public knowledge. I thought about what would happen to them if every government agency, every media outlet, every exploitation artist descended on their habitat. And I thought about Hassan's words, evidence of genetic admixture. They'd bred with humans, which meant they were intelligent enough for cultural exchange, maybe for communication. They weren't just animals, they were people, different, but people. If I sign this, I said slowly, do I get to actually help them, actually work on conservation? That's the job, Thompson said. I signed. God help me, I signed. They took the specimen that night, loaded it into a refrigerated truck, drove it away to some federal facility I'd never heard of. Karen was brought in for questioning, signed her own non-disclosure agreement. Hassan and Patricia were given the same choice I was, cooperate or face charges. Jennifer refused. She fought them, hired a lawyer, threatened to go public. She died 3 months later in a car accident. Single vehicle collision, icy roads, no witnesses. The official report said she'd been drinking. Jennifer didn't drink, hadn't touched alcohol in 20 years. Nobody asked questions, nobody investigated, and I learned that some secrets were enforced with more than just legal threats. I spent the next 27 years working for the Federal Bigfoot Research and Conservation Program. 27 years studying a species most of the world thought was fake. 27 years learning that truth was negotiable, that evidence could be buried, that sometimes the people in charge decided what reality was allowed to be. The facility was in Fort Detrick, Maryland, deep underground, behind security that made nuclear sites look casual. The frozen specimen was there, perfectly preserved in a chamber kept at minus 40 degrees. There were other specimens too. Tissue samples, hair, scat, footprint casts, photographs and video footage that would have changed the world if anyone had seen them. And there was documentation. Decades of reports on sightings, encounters, population surveys, maps showing habitat ranges across the Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, parts of Canada, genetic samples from living individuals, carefully collected, analyzed, stored. They were real. God help me, they were real. And they were dying. The program director was a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Blackwood, 68 years old when I met her, career government scientist who'd spent 40 years managing the impossible. She had white haircut, severe and short, glasses that magnified her eyes until she looked perpetually startled, and a way of speaking that made every word sound like a classified document being declassified just for you. "Welcome to the most important work nobody knows exists," she said the first day. "We're trying to save a species while pretending it doesn't exist. It's exactly as difficult as it sounds. The living population estimates were worse than Thompson had told me. Not 600, closer to 450, maybe less. Spread across isolated pockets of wilderness from Northern California to British Columbia, with smaller populations in the Northern Rockies and a remnant group in the Appalachians that probably wouldn't survive another generation. They were dying for all the usual reasons endangered species die: habitat loss, genetic bottlenecks from small population sizes, human encroachment, climate change altering the forests they needed. But they were also dying for unusual reasons specific to being an intelligent species trying to survive in secret. They couldn't adapt to changing conditions without moving into new territory. And every new territory meant increased risk of human contact. Every human contact meant potential exposure. Every exposure meant the program had to intervene, relocate them, sometimes tranquilize and transport them to safer areas. The stress killed them. The disruption of their social structures killed them. The constant fear of discovery was killing them as surely as habitat loss. "They know we're watching," Blackwood told me during one briefing. "They're intelligent enough to recognize surveillance. They avoid our monitoring equipment when they can. Sometimes they destroy it. But they also seem to understand we're trying to protect them, or at least not harm them. It's a strange relationship, part conservation, part mutual avoidance pact. I threw myself into the work because what else was I going to do? The specimen I'd found was here, available for study. The data I'd collected was now part of a larger database spanning decades. And maybe, just maybe, I could actually help save them. The genetics were my focus. Hassan joined the program too, had taken the same deal I had, signed the same papers. Together we spent years analyzing the DNA, tracking genetic diversity across populations, identifying breeding pairs through environmental DNA sampling, trying to understand the full picture of their evolutionary history. What we found was remarkable and heartbreaking. The species had diverged from the human line around 400,000 years ago during a period when multiple hominid species existed simultaneously. They'd evolved for cold climates, for life in mountainous forests, for survival in environments that would kill humans without technology. Their population had once been large, maybe 10,000 or more, spread across Eurasia and North America. But they'd been hunted, not by predators, by humans. Ancient DNA from archaeological sites showed evidence of conflict, human tools found with what appeared to be their remains. Cave paintings in Europe showing large, hairy humanoids being chased by human hunters. They hadn't gone extinct like Neanderthals through slow absorption into human populations. They'd been actively eliminated from most of their range. The survivors had learned to hide, had learned to avoid humans at all costs, had developed a culture. Yes, culture. They had culture based on concealment and survival through invisibility. They taught their young to fear humans, to run from any sign of human presence, to leave no traces that could be followed. And it had worked. For thousands of years, it had worked. They'd survived in the margins, in the places humans didn't go, in the deep wilderness where legends grew but proof never materialized. Until the 20th century, when there was no wilderness left that humans didn't touch. They're dying because they're too good at hiding, I told Blackwood one day in 2003. I was 67 then, feeling it in every joint, hands aching from arthritis that made lab work a daily struggle. They can't adapt because adaptation means visibility. They can't ask for help because they don't know they can. They're locked into a survival strategy that worked for millennia but doesn't work anymore. So what do you suggest? We need to make contact, real contact, communication. See if we can establish some kind of understanding, some kind of cooperative conservation effort. She looked at me over her glasses. Jake, we've tried. Multiple times over the years. They run. Always. They're more afraid of us than we could possibly be of them. Have we tried not being frightening? Have we tried approaching them as equals instead of as specimens to be studied? It's not that simple, but I kept pushing. And in 2005, we got our chance. A monitoring team in the Cascades up near the Canadian border had been tracking a family group, 2 adults, 3 juveniles. They had a regular territory, predictable movement patterns, seemed stable. The team leader, a field researcher named Tyler Garcia, 59, former wildlife biologist who'd stumbled onto the program after a close encounter convinced him the legends were real, he suggested we try passive contact. Leave gifts, non-threatening items, food, tools, signs that we meant no harm. Blackwood approved it as an experiment. We started small. Caches of dried salmon, left in areas where the family group foraged. High-quality rope, tanned hides, things that would be useful but not threatening. We monitored from a distance using remote cameras, never approaching, never intruding. At first, nothing. The caches were ignored, left untouched. But after 3 weeks, the food started disappearing. Then the rope, then the hides. We left more. Added variety, included simple tools, knives, with the blades wrapped in leather, handles made from wood they'd recognize, non-threatening presentation. 4 months into the experiment, we found something at one of the cache sites. A gift in return. It was a basket, woven from cedar bark and pine needles, intricate work, beautiful craftsmanship. Inside were medicinal plants, devil's club root, yarrow, plants known to have healing properties. And a stone, smooth river stone, with a symbol carved into it, a circle with lines radiating out. Sun, maybe, or something else. Communication. They're responding, I said, staring at the basket, hands trembling as I held it. They're trying to communicate back. We continued the exchange for another year. Left gifts, received gifts in return. The baskets became more elaborate. Sometimes they included carved wooden figures, animals, trees, shapes we couldn't identify. Sometimes they included food they'd prepared, dried meat, preserves made from berries and honey. This is incredible, Hassan said during one analysis session. We were examining a wooden carving, a bear with detail so fine you could see individual teeth, individual claws. This level of craftsmanship requires fine motor control, planning, artistic vision. They're not just intelligent, they're artists. But the program wouldn't let us go further, wouldn't let us try face-to-face contact. Too risky, they said, too unpredictable. We had to maintain distance, maintain the boundary between observation and interaction. I argued, fought, wrote reports detailing why communication was essential for long-term conservation. The species needed to know we were trying to help, needed to understand that not all humans were threats, needed to be partners in their own survival, not just subjects of secret protection. I was overruled every time. In 2007, disaster struck. A logging company had permits for timber harvesting in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington, federal land, but commercial logging was allowed in certain areas. One of those areas overlapped with habitat used by a small group of 7 individuals. The program tried to intervene, tried to get the permits revoked, delayed, modified, but doing so would require explaining why, and explaining why meant exposing the truth. The permits went through. Logging started in July. On August 14th, 2007, a logging crew encountered one of the creatures. Male, approximately 9 feet tall, defensive posture, because they were working near what we later learned was his family's primary shelter. One of the loggers panicked, grabbed his rifle from the truck, fired 3 shots. 2 hit. The creature died within minutes. The crew called it in to their supervisor, who called it into federal authorities, who called us. I was on site within 8 hours, part of the rapid response team we'd established for exactly this kind of incident. The body was still there when we arrived, covered with tarps, surrounded by shocked loggers who were being questioned by federal agents. The crew claimed it was self-defense, that the creature had charged their equipment operator. The investigation concluded it was likely a misunderstanding. The creature had been trying to scare them away from his territory, a defensive display that was misinterpreted as an attack. The logger who'd pulled the trigger was devastated when he learned what he'd killed. He'd thought it was a bear, thought he was protecting his crew, Instead, he'd killed a thinking, being a father, a person. I performed the necropsy, had to, part of the job, document everything, learn what we could from the tragedy. It was a male, approximately 35 years old, 680 pounds, old injuries healed over, evidence of a life lived hard but survived, scars on his torso, arms, legs, one ear partially missing, old wound, probably from a territorial fight with another male decades ago. And in his stomach contents, we found something that broke me. Partially digested berries. The same kind we'd been leaving as gifts in the Cascades 300 miles north. These populations weren't as isolated as we thought. They traveled, shared information. And somehow, the knowledge that humans occasionally left food gifts had spread between groups. He might have been approaching the loggers not to attack, but to see if they had gifts. Might have been trying to make contact the way his distant relatives in the Cascades had learned to do. We'd taught them that some humans were safe, and it had gotten one of them killed. The logging company was paid off, signed NDAs. The crew was relocated, split up, sent to different states with different companies. The body was transported to Fort Detrick, became specimen number 37 in our collection of the dead. And I started questioning whether secrecy was really protecting these creatures or just protecting us from having to deal with difficult truths. The years blurred after that. I was in my 70s, getting too old for fieldwork, but too stubborn to retire. Arthritis had claimed most of the dexterity in my hands. My heart had a rhythm like a drunk playing drums, irregular, concerning, medicated into submission. But I kept working because stopping meant acknowledging I'd wasted 30 years of my life keeping a secret that was killing the very species it was meant to protect. Population numbers kept declining. By 2010, we estimated fewer than 300 individuals remained. Genetic diversity was critically low. Inbreeding was becoming apparent in juvenile specimens we examined. Shortened lifespans, increased infant mortality, fertility problems. The species was in a death spiral, and our secrecy wasn't helping. It was accelerating the decline. I started keeping personal copies of data, photographs, DNA sequences, reports, stored them at home, encrypted, backed up, hidden. Insurance, I told myself. Evidence, if I ever needed it. Proof that this wasn't delusion, wasn't conspiracy theory, wasn't the ravings of an old man losing his grip. It was real. They were real. And they were dying while we watched in secret. In 2015, another incident. This one worse than the logging company disaster. A family group in British Columbia, too close to a planned resort development, 2 adults, 3 juveniles. We needed to relocate them. Had to. If we didn't, they'd either be discovered during construction or forced into territory that couldn't support them. We'd never attempted a relocation before, never tried to tranquilize and transport them. Too risky, too traumatic, but the alternative was exposure or death, so we tried. The operation was planned for months. Veterinary team. Transport vehicles, a new territory 300 miles north, carefully surveyed, good habitat, no human activity, everything perfect on paper. Reality wasn't paper. We used tranquilizer darts, calculated dosages based on estimated body weight, metabolic rates extrapolated from tissue samples. Should have worked, should have been safe. The male had an adverse reaction, started seizing. Heart arrhythmia, respiratory distress. Our vet team tried everything, every emergency protocol, every drug we had. Nothing worked. He died during transport, massive heart failure, body shutting down from the stress and the drugs and the fear. The female and juveniles were released in the new territory, monitored for months after. They never adapted. The juveniles separated from the mother prematurely, driven away, or leaving on their own. We couldn't tell which. Their survival was uncertain. The mother was last seen heading south, back toward her original territory, moving through areas too close to human habitation, taking risks no healthy individual would take. We destroyed their family, killed the male, traumatized the survivors. All in the name of protection. We killed him. I told Jennifer, no, wait. Jennifer was dead. Gone 20 years by then. I told Hassan, in the lab at Fort Detrick, both of us old men staring at data that documented our failure. We were trying to help, and we killed him. We made the best decision we could with the information we had, Hassan said. But even he sounded uncertain. That's not good enough. We're playing God with an intelligent species, making life and death decisions about them in secret, with no oversight, no accountability. This isn't conservation. This is control. This is us deciding they're better off hidden, better off dying slowly in secret, than taking the risk of letting the world know they exist. Hassan was quiet for a long time. Then, so what do we do? I don't know yet. But I'm 67 years old, I don't have many years left, and I'm tired of lying. That was when I decided. When I retired and I was already past normal retirement age, staying on because the program needed the institutional knowledge, the decades of experience when I finally left, I'd wait for my legal obligations to expire, and then I'd tell the story. Not all of it. I wouldn't reveal current locations, wouldn't put living populations at risk, but I'd reveal the frozen specimen, the DNA results, the proof that they existed. I'd force the conversation into the open, make it impossible to keep hiding the truth. Let the world decide what to do with that knowledge. Let people make informed choices about conservation, about coexistence, about what it meant that we shared the planet with another intelligent species. I retired in 2020, supposed to have been 2018, but COVID happened and everything got delayed. Pandemic response took priority. The program continued, running on skeleton crews, monitoring from a distance, watching the population decline as the world fell apart for humans, and nobody spared a thought for the other species struggling to survive. By the time I finally left, signed my last report, turned in my security credentials, walked out of Fort Detrick for the final time, I was 73 years old. Felt like 100. Every joint ached. Heart medication had increased twice in the past 5 years. Reading glasses weren't enough anymore. Needed magnification for lab work I wasn't doing anymore anyway. But my mind was clear, and I remembered everything. I spent 2021 and 22 organizing my materials. The data I'd kept, the photographs I'd saved, DNA sequences, research reports, documentation of encounters and studies and conservation efforts, decades of evidence, carefully preserved, encrypted, backed up in multiple locations. I reached out to a journalist, someone I'd known casually for years, someone who'd built a reputation for careful, ethical reporting on scientific controversies. Rachel Moore, 55, worked for a major science publication, had broken stories on corporate research fraud, government cover-ups of environmental disasters, always with meticulous documentation, always protecting sources, always getting the story right. I sent her a carefully worded email, asked if she'd be interested in the story of the century, a discovery that had been suppressed for decades, proof of a species thought to be myth. She called me 2 hours later. We met in a coffee shop in Seattle. Anonymous. Public enough to be safe, quiet enough to talk. I brought a tablet with sample data, photographs that wouldn't reveal too much but would show enough. The frozen specimen, DNA results, field photographs that showed something that couldn't be dismissed as hoax or misidentification. Rachel stared at the images for a long time, then looked at me, searching my face for signs of delusion, of dementia, of conspiracy theorist, paranoia. "You're serious," she said. "Dead serious. This will destroy your reputation. Even with evidence, people will call you a fraud. The government will deny everything. They'll discredit you, attack your career, make you look like a crackpot. I know. Why now? Why not years ago?" I looked at my hands, 73 years old, arthritis making the joints swell, making every movement hurt, because they're still out there, still dying. Population's down to maybe 200 now. Another 50 years, maybe less, and they'll be extinct. And it'll happen in secret, nobody will know, nobody will care. Nobody will even realize we lost another intelligent species because we were too afraid to admit they existed. Rachel was quiet, thinking. Then, "What do you need from me? Tell the story. I'll give you everything I have, all my documentation, all my evidence. You verify it, fact check it, make sure it's bulletproof, then you publish. And we let the chips fall where they may." She nodded slowly. "This is going to take time. Months, probably. Maybe a year or more. I'll need to verify your credentials, authenticate the evidence, get corroborating sources if possible. Are you prepared for that?" I've been preparing for 20 years. The investigation took longer than expected. Rachel was thorough, meticulous. She tracked down other researchers who'd been part of the program, got statements from those willing to talk. Hassan agreed to provide corroboration, signed affidavits confirming the DNA results, the species identification, the conservation program's existence. Karen Martinez, retired now, living in Alaska, agreed to come forward. She'd been there at the beginning, had helped excavate the frozen specimen, could verify the discovery, the preservation, the initial analysis. Tyler Garcia, the field researcher from the Cascades, he talked too, confirmed the gift exchanges, the communication attempts, the evidence of intelligence and culture, said he'd been waiting years for someone to force this into the open. Others refused, too afraid of legal repercussions, too dependent on government pensions they couldn't afford to lose, too invested in the official story to admit they'd spent careers lying. But Rachel was building a case, assembling evidence, creating a narrative that was verifiable, documented, impossible to easily dismiss. And then, in March of 2024, she told me she was ready. The story would publish in May. Full documentary evidence, testimony from multiple sources, photographs of the specimen, DNA data, everything needed to prove the case. "Are you ready?" she asked. I thought about Jennifer, dead in a car accident that wasn't an accident, about the logger who'd killed a thinking being and had to live with that, about the male who died during relocation, leaving his family shattered, about Hassan's baskets and Tyler's gift exchanges, and all the small moments of communication that proved these weren't animals, weren't specimens, weren't myths. They were people. Different people, but people. And they were dying. "I'm ready," I said. The story published on May 15th, 2024, front page of the Science publication, full documentary spread online, photographs, DNA data, testimony, coordinates of the original discovery site, everything. The response was exactly what we'd expected. The government denied everything. The specimen didn't exist, they said. The DNA was contaminated samples, hoax data, manipulated results. My credentials were questioned. My mental state was examined. Government officials gave statements saying I'd been let go from a research position years ago for erratic behavior, that my claims were the sad delusions of an old man seeking attention. Rachel was attacked too. Her journalism credentials, her fact-checking process, her sources. Other scientists, ones who'd never examined the evidence, never seen the data published op-eds calling it pseudoscience, cryptozoology, fraud, but not everyone dismissed it. Other journalists started investigating. Other scientists started asking questions. Freedom of information requests were filed for records of the program. When those requests were denied on national security grounds, that raised more questions. Why would Bigfoot research be classified as national security? What was the government hiding? Independent researchers traveled to the coordinates I'd provided for the Mendenhall Glacier discovery site. The glacier had continued retreating since 1996. The site was now fully exposed, bare rock and ice, where once there had been dozens of feet of glacial coverage. They found more evidence, not another body, but artifacts. Stone tools, cached in a crevice that had been covered by ice for thousands of years, carved wooden objects, preserved by the cold, and bones, animal bones, processed, butchered, showing clear signs of tool use. More evidence of the camp or settlement where the frozen individual had lived, died, been preserved for millennia. The carbon dating matched my original specimen, 9,400 years, give or take. The tools matched the technology level we'd estimated. The evidence was consistent. The story gained traction. Documentary filmmakers reached out, wanted to tell the story, interview me, visit the discovery site. Major news networks started covering it, moving beyond dismissal into actual investigation. The scientific community split between skeptics demanding more evidence and advocates calling for transparent research and conservation efforts if the species existed. And then, in August 2024, something unexpected happened. A video surfaced online. Shot on a trail camera in the Cascade Mountains, date-stamped 3 months earlier. It showed a figure, large, bipedal, covered in dark hair, moving through forest at dusk. The figure was carrying something, a young one, smaller, clinging to the adult's back. The video quality was clear. The movement was natural. The figure was aware of the camera, looked directly at it for several seconds before moving on. The camera belonged to a recreational hiker who'd set it up to film wildlife. He'd found the footage, initially thought it was a man in a costume. Then he saw the coverage of my story, realized what he might have captured, released the video publicly. Analysis of the video showed no signs of digital manipulation, no costume artifacts. The proportions were wrong for a human in a suit arm length, leg length, torso size, all outside normal human ranges. Movement analysis suggested biomechanics inconsistent with human locomotion. It wasn't proof, not definitive, but it was evidence, real evidence, from an independent source, corroborating what I'd claimed. More videos started surfacing, photographs, people who'd had encounters, who'd been too afraid of ridicule to come forward before, now felt safe sharing their experiences. The volume of reports was overwhelming. Most were probably misidentifications, bears, people in costumes, hoaxes, but some had the ring of truth. Detailed descriptions, consistent behavior patterns, multiple witnesses, physical evidence like footprints, hair sample. The conversation shifted from do they exist to if they exist, what do we do? That's where we are now. November of 2024, 6 months since the story broke. The government still denies everything, but their denials ring hollow. Too many questions, too much evidence. Too many people asking why, if it's all fake, are they so desperate to suppress it? There are calls for congressional hearings, demands for declassification of program records, freedom of information lawsuits, environmental groups calling for habitat protection, Native American tribes claiming cultural and spiritual connection to the species, demanding consultation on any conservation efforts. It's messy. It's complicated. It's everything I knew it would be, but at least it's in the open. At least people know. At least the conversation is happening. The species is still endangered, maybe more endangered now than before, with increased attention, potentially bringing increased risk. But they also have advocates now, people demanding their protection, scientists calling for research programs, conservationists working on habitat preservation. And maybe, just maybe, they have a chance they didn't have before. I'm 74 years old now, heart's worse. Doctor says I've got maybe 5 years if I'm lucky, less if I'm not. Arthritis has claimed my hands entirely. Can't do lab work anymore, can barely write, but I can talk, I can tell the story, I can be interviewed, give testimony, provide evidence, do everything I can to keep the truth alive until it's too embedded to bury again. Rachel published a book, My Story, expanded with all the documentation, all the evidence, all the testimony. It's selling well. Controversial, yes. Dismissed by some, embraced by others. But it's out there. The information exists in the world now, can't be taken back, can't be classified after the fact. Hassan sends me emails. He's working with independent research groups now, analyzing DNA samples people claim to have collected, trying to verify or debunk them, separating real evidence from hoaxes and misidentifications, building a scientific case piece by piece. Karen's working with environmental groups in Alaska, advocating for wilderness protection in areas that might be habitat. She doesn't say it's for Bigfoot, still too controversial, but she talks about preserving large mammal habitat, protecting ecosystem integrity, maintaining wilderness for future generations. Tyler's leading educational programs, teaching people about forest ecology, wildlife behavior, the importance of respecting wilderness. He doesn't advertise it, but people who go through his programs come out with a different perspective. More respectful, more aware that we're not alone out there. The work continues. Different now, public instead of secret, messy instead of controlled, but at least it's real. I think about the frozen body sometimes. The one I pulled from the Glacier in '96, that individual who died 9,400 years ago, probably cold and alone, probably afraid, probably hoping someone would survive, would carry on, would remember. Their DNA lives on in modern humans, 2 to 3% of the genome in some populations. They're part of us, literally, genetically, historically. We're connected in ways we never acknowledged, ways we deliberately ignored, because it was easier to dismiss them as myths than deal with the reality of coexistence. But that individual's body told a story, and I'm making sure that story gets heard. The phone rings sometimes, unknown numbers, I don't answer those anymore, let them go to voicemail. The messages are usually threats, accusations, angry dismissals. Sometimes they're from believers thanking me. Sometimes they're from people claiming their own encounters, wanting validation, wanting someone to listen. I listen when I can, because if nothing else, I know what it's like to see something that shouldn't exist and have nobody believe you. The sun sets earlier now. November in Seattle, the light dying young, darkness coming before dinner. I sit in my house, bought it 40 years ago when my wife was still alive, when we thought we'd grow old here together before cancer took her in 2002, and I watched the light fade through the windows. The arthritis makes my hands look like gnarled roots. The medication makes me tired. The knowledge that I've got maybe 5 years left makes every moment feel both precious and pointless. But I'm not done yet. There are people working on a documentary, comprehensive, evidence-based, featuring testimony from multiple researchers, analysis from independent scientists, investigation into the government program. It'll air next year. I'll be in it. Talking head segments, describing the discovery, explaining the science, telling the story. There are legal efforts to force declassification of program records. Long shot, probably won't succeed, but worth trying. If we can get those records, decades of research, documentation, evidence, it would be game over for the denial. There are plans for expeditions to areas that might be current habitat, not to harass, not to expose, but to document carefully, respectfully, with protocols designed to minimize impact. Let them stay hidden if they want, but gather evidence of their existence for conservation purposes. It's not enough. Maybe it'll never be enough, but it's something, and maybe that's all any of us can do. Tell the truth, share the evidence, let people decide for themselves what they believe, what they'll accept, what they'll do with the knowledge. The frozen body in Alaska was real. is real somewhere in Fort Detrick, unless they've destroyed it, which they might have. The DNA results were real. The conservation program was real. The dying species is real. And now you know what you do with that knowledge is up to you. You can dismiss it, call it delusion, conspiracy theory, the ravings of an old man who doesn't know when to shut up. That's fine. I expected that. Or you can sit with the discomfort. Can ask yourself what it means that we might share the planet with another intelligent species. Can wonder what it says about humanity that we chose secrecy over coexistence, that we decided hiding was better than trying to find a way to live together. Can ask what else we might be hiding, what other truths we've decided are too dangerous, too complicated, too disruptive to acknowledge. I don't have all the answers. Never did. I'm just a scientist who found something extraordinary and spent 30 years being told to pretend it didn't exist. But I'm done pretending. The species might not survive. The population's too small, the genetic diversity too limited, the habitat too fragmented. Even with public awareness, even with conservation efforts, it might be too late. But at least they won't disappear in silence. At least their existence will be acknowledged. At least future generations will know they were here, that they were real, that they mattered. The frozen individual from the glacier, the one who died 9,000 years ago, they're not forgotten anymore. Their DNA told a story. Their body provided evidence. Their existence forced a conversation that should have happened decades ago. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered, being acknowledged, being proven real after millennia of being dismissed as myth. Maybe that's enough. I'll probably die before I see how this ends. Whether conservation efforts succeed, whether the species survives, whether people accept the truth or keep denying it. But I told the story. I shared the evidence. I forced the conversation into the open. And I'd do it again, because some truths are more important than career, reputation, safety. Some truths demand to be told regardless of the cost. Some truths are worth dying for, worth being called crazy for, worth risking everything to share. This was one of those truths. The Bigfoot body we found frozen in Alaska was real. The DNA proved it. The government knew. And they kept it secret for decades, while these creatures marched toward extinction. Now you know. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? I chose to speak. What will you choose? The light's almost gone now. The house is getting dark. I should turn on lights, make dinner, take my evening medication, continue the routine that keeps me alive day after day after day, but I sit in the gathering darkness instead, looking out at the Seattle streets, the houses where people live normal lives with normal concerns, unaware or uncaring about the things hiding in the mountains, the secrets buried in government facilities, the species dying in silence. And I think about the forests up north, the Cascades, where Tyler Garcia tried to make contact, where gift exchanges happened between species, where for a brief moment we almost figured out how to coexist. I think about the basket they wove, the carvings they made, the intelligence behind those gifts, the communication attempt, the reaching across the species barrier. I think about the male who died during relocation, the family destroyed by our intervention, the logger who killed without knowing what he was killing, the countless small tragedies that accumulated over decades of secret protection that protected nothing but our own comfortable ignorance. And I think about the frozen body, that individual who survived the end of the Ice Age, who lived in a world so different from ours it might as well be another planet, who died and was preserved and eventually found and studied and became the key to proving their species existed. That individual has a legacy now, a story, a meaning beyond just being frozen meat pulled from a glacier. They changed the world, changed our understanding of human evolution, of what intelligence means, of who we share this planet with. Not bad for someone who died 9,000 years ago. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to leave something behind. Some mark on the world, some evidence that we existed, that we mattered, that our lives meant something. I'm 74 years old, got maybe 5 years left. Most of my friends are dead. My wife's been gone 20 years. My career was spent in secrecy, studying creatures most people think are fake, but I have a legacy now. I'm the man who proved Bigfoot was real. I'm the man who forced the truth into the open. I'm the man who gave a dying species a chance, however slim, to survive. That'll do. The darkness is complete now. The house is cold. I should move, should turn on lights, should take care of myself the way doctors keep telling me to. But I sit a moment longer, in the dark, in the cold, thinking about the creatures out there in the mountains, wondering if they know what I did, if they understand that one of us finally spoke up for them. If they care. Probably not. They've survived by not caring what humans think, by staying hidden, by trusting nothing and no one. Smart. But maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the Cascades, or the Rockies, or the deep forests of British Columbia, one of them will find a gift cache left by someone who read the story, who believes, who wants to help. And maybe they'll understand that not all of us are threats, that some of us are trying, that coexistence is possible if we're willing to try. Maybe. Or maybe they'll just take the food and disappear back into the forest, suspicious and afraid, trusting nothing, surviving another day through secrecy and silence. Either way, they're real, and now the world knows it. That'll have to be enough. I stand finally, joints protesting, heart doing its irregular dance, body reminding me I'm running out of time. Turn on the lights, make dinner, take medication, go through the motions of staying alive. Because there's still work to do, still interviews to give, still evidence to share, still a conversation to keep alive until it's too embedded to bury. The frozen body from Alaska changed my life, changed everything I thought I knew about the world, changed what it meant to be human, to be alone, to be responsible for other thinking beings. And in the end, it gave me purpose, gave me a reason to risk everything, to speak truth that powerful people wanted buried, to force a conversation that needed to happen. I'd do it all again. Every time, because the truth matters. Evidence matters. These creatures matter. And sometimes, the most important thing an old man can do is refuse to be silenced. I'm Jake Miller. I'm 74 years old. I discovered Bigfoot was real, proved it, and told the world, despite every threat, every consequence, every reason to stay quiet. And I'm not done yet. Not until they're safe, not until they survive, not until the truth is so deeply embedded that it can never be buried again. That's my legacy. That's what I'll leave behind. And it's enough.